You're listening to Unfiltered, real talk about sex and love with Ashley
and Heather. And on today's episode, we're going to be really discussing how can a betrayed partner provide support to their addicted husband. And I think that this sometimes can be a little bit of a tense conversation because a lot of partners, especially early on in the healing process, are really hurt and in so much pain because of their spouse's behaviors. And so we have gotten several questions on, does this seem normal? Do I have to do this? Help me out. Help me figuring this out.
Yes. So leading in right to our first question, do I have to have sex whenever he wants it to keep him from temptation? This is if we did a Mythbusters episode, this would be on it. That having more sex with our spouse is going to keep them from acting out sexually. Or, if we find out about infidelity or pornography use and we want to keep ourselves safe or say we're not going to have sex for a while until we feel safe again, that somehow is going to just make them want to stray even further. And that's just not true. And the pressure, unfortunately, the pressure doesn't have to be on you, but it kind of is as a betrayed spouse. And so what I found is putting a pause on sex for a while was not only good for the addict spouse to recalibrate kind of sexually, like bring him back down to what's normal and get him away from being attached to pornography. But then for the betrayed spouse, we can also get into a rut of believing that if we don't have sex with them, that will cause them to act out, or that, we're obligated to have sex with them however often, or that we should never say no to our spouse unless it's to pray, or, all these different things. And so for the betrayed spouse, it's good for them to also say how many times you're having sex is not a good way to measure whether your marriage is healthy or not.
Right.
Because a lot of times people are still having sex even when there's a spouse that's being deceiving or acting out or having an affair. And so that's not a good measure. And so to just say, we're going to put a pause on all of this because we need to emotionally and mentally, spiritually figure out us and make sure that we're okay before we start to engage sexually again.
And I think a lot of partners, they feel responsible for it because if you're the person that your husband has sex with and you're for all the reasons are not wanting to participate in that or not wanting to feel like that's your obligation as a Christian wife that you have to have sex whenever they want to. I just think that those messages are so harmful. And especially if there has been, addiction and betrayal in the relationship, that it's okay for you to take time for yourself and for your healing, but also to remember that you're not the one responsible for his behaviors.
Right.
He is always 100% responsible for the choices that he makes. So, yeah, so important.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and even when you do that, ask yourself, like when you're starting to feel insecure or like detached because you guys haven't had sex, ask yourself, why am I feeling that way? And what do I need? And what other than sex would help me feel connected to my spouse? And you start developing what ways you can feel emotionally connected outside of sex with your spouse as well.
Yeah, that's a great question. So our second question says, my husband is working on his recovery, but he says he needs me to be more supportive. I'm crushed and angry. How can I tell him I'm unable to cheer him on right now? I think that this also is a really tough place for partners to be, and especially when a lot of times when there's been secretive addictive behaviors going on over here and at some point discovery or disclosure happens, it's almost like a partner is brought into it right in the middle. You weren't involved at the beginning, but this is definitely not the end. And so you're brought into a situation right in the middle. And even just having to navigate that can be really harmful and really challenging in so many ways. We use in one of our curriculum, we talk about how, his reality and her reality, that when a partner just feels like they've just been dumped on all of the secrets and all the disclosure and everything comes to light, that they're starting to feel like, I can't believe I was married to this person. I can't believe that I feel so unloved, that our whole entire marriage has been a lie and a secret. And now I don't even know what is true. And then you have the the addict spouse's perspective of saying, I feel so free. Everything's out in the open. I can be free from all of this burden that I've carried, but they don't realize that they just dumped it on their wife. Everything that they were feeling is now on her, plus her own feelings of shame and insecurity and everything and betrayal and the trauma she's experiencing. And so I think sometimes we don't necessarily talk about it enough, that for partners, that it's okay for you to not be his biggest fan right now, and especially if everything that you thought was true in your relationship is not true, and you're kind of having to go through all your memories and sort out what was real and what was not real. But this is a great opportunity for him to be in a group. Because if he's in a group and he's sharing these things with other men and they're in a 7 Pillars of Freedom group, then he's going to have people cheering him on there. And it's okay if you're not going to be his cheerleader right now, because what would be best for you is for you to go and get some help and the healing that you need from a Betrayal and Beyond group. And it's okay for you to say out loud, I'm so glad that you're going to be in group and that you're going to find healing from your compulsive sexual behaviors. But I am so hurt and wounded right now that I can't be a part of that yet.
Yeah. I'm so glad you brought up the addict reality and the spouse reality chart, because that's what I was thinking too. And so again, if this spouse has not been through Betrayal and Beyond group, go through that, because learning that was what really helped John and I. He's just thriving and he's free. You use the dump truck analogy. He's free of 20 years of loaded up stress and shame and addiction. And I'm discovering it for the first time all at once. And so it's dumped on me. And as he's like, this is the first time I felt free as a husband, as a Christian man. I finally feel authentic before God and church. And he's coming home from group just so excited. And I was so angry. And I know that many, many spouses feel the same way.
Yes.
I felt if I celebrate your victories, then you may too easily move past that I am still deeply hurt. And so figuring out a way to let them have their victories, especially like what you said, you don't have to be their cheerleader. It could be their group. It could be a mentor. It could be their group leader. But still understand that there needs to be a point where where he does then learn about betrayal trauma and learn about what you've been through and empathize with that and apologize for that. That there's a whole lot of work to be done, even if he's having victories, and that you can give yourself grace to know the healthier he gets, the more prepared he'll be to then acknowledge the betrayal trauma and dive into that, learning about that. And it doesn't negate your experience. It doesn't make what happened okay. That's kind of what I'll hear from women. Like if I'm joyful with him and excited for him, then it just feels like my pain doesn't matter anymore. Like we're done with it.
Yeah. And that's why I think sometimes that when we have groups for men who struggle and groups for women who've experienced betrayal, that there's a lot of purpose in that, because a lot of times when these kind of situations happen in a marriage, that them locking arms and moving forward is not going to happen.
Yeah.
And so it's best if they can, kind of seek healing through their own groups, so that when the time comes, they can then lock arms and move forward together.
Yeah. Okay, the last question we have is it true that men only feel intimacy through sex? No, that's not true. I was thinking about this too this morning. Men have been taught that it's weak to show emotions, to want connection through emotional intimacy. I mean, there's just so many jokes of men being sensitive, or they're told to cry and it's not manly to do A, B, and C. And I do feel like we're getting better as a society as far as like understanding that it's good for everybody to feel their emotions and express them and need, connection. But I have never met a guy that has come through one of our groups or any of our programs at Pure Desire that at the core of it wasn't some feeling of abandonment, not being good enough, not being loved, not feeling unconditionally accepted and loved by their parents. Like that's at the root of why they act out sexually. And so yes, they need emotional intimacy as well, even if they're not aware of it at first, because this question is clearly coming to us. We deal with sexual addiction, and so in sexual addiction, your whole empathy, emotional dial can be turned down because you're numbing all of your feelings in this way. And so it's a whole process to take out the coping mechanism, the drug, and to then be left with your feelings. And so about 4 or 5 months into our process, I remember John and I just started fighting a lot. And Dr. Ted was like, that's perfectly normal, because now you guys are dealing with your emotions face to face rather than him coping and medicating with pornography. His emotions are something he has to deal with now. And so if your husband is an addict, then there needs to be a whole reset and a relearning there as well.
Mm-hmm. And I think that this is true of both men and women, that if we weren't raised in an environment where emotions were talked about or that emotions were safe, then a lot of us learned to stuff these feelings down. I know that that was something that I had kind of struggled with when in my first marriage. Mm-hmm. And it was really only through counseling as I was going through a divorce that I recognized that I did have a lot more feelings than what I thought that I had, but I had trained myself to stuff them down because they weren't safe and they were not helpful in my situation. And so I think that that's the other piece to this, is that if men are going to learn how to be more emotionally engaged and even just emotionally aware, then they need to be able to have the space for it where they can say things out loud, they can talk about it, and that they're not going to be shamed for it in any way. Because I know that my husband is very emotionally aware. I mean, he was raised by a mom and 5 older sisters, but it really was one of those opportunities that he had to say things out loud, to say how he felt about things. And even my sons, they were raised in an environment where feelings are totally okay and they're just part of life. And it's okay to be able to say, I'm angry about this, or I'm hurt, or I'm disappointed. And just giving them the space and the opportunity to explore that could be really, really beneficial, not only to them, but also to the marriage.
Yeah. And there is some truth in saying that women may be more stimulated by conversation and men may be more stimulated by visual, images. Like there are natural differences still between men and women, but everybody needs emotional intimacy.
Right.
That's like non-negotiable. I mean, you can live without sex, but you cannot function as a healthy person without good emotional connection and intimacy with others.
Right. And so there's a lot of tools to use with this. I know that we use this in our curriculum. I know too that most men will go through 7 Pillars of Freedom, and then after they've gone through that 1 or 2 times, then they'll go through the Compassionate Warrior. And the Compassionate Warrior specifically has built in this emotional awareness in a way that 7 Pillars doesn't have, and it's a great opportunity for men to kind of learn that next level of healing for themselves.
Well, I remember when after we had put together Unraveled and John was going through it, and he's like, why is this not in the men's? But he kept looking at a bunch of lessons, why is this not in the men's resource? And it is. And then that time that I gave my son, at the time he was 15, I gave him the love addiction evaluation out of the women's material, and he scored off the charts. I'm like, you are my mini-me. Just you want that emotional acceptance and approval. And so it's very much guy-girl problem to have and to deal with and to work on. So
for sure.
Well, thank you for joining us today. And remember that we're listener driven. So please send your questions to unfiltered@puredesire.org. And if you found this episode helpful, share it with a friend.